Welcome back to everyone's favourite segment,
Septic tanks that have learned to tide.
Yes, ever since Labour got elected, I've had time to go back on my Nixon's enemies list, and this one made me go, because the following hit piece is so bad that I actually do have to make this point that
I am not a crook.
yeah, it's from a while ago. Yeah, I'm basically responding to Otzi the Iceman at this point, the only difference being, I think that mummified popsicle would have had some friends. Unlike this week's human hump of camel fat, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Rick Morton, the absolute worst timeline of both Rick and Morty, smushed together, fattened with that McDonald's Szechuan sauce they're obsessed with in every parallel universe imaginable to get that particularly blobby physique. Who'd have guessed that someone that looks like me? Sucks. Look at him. It's sad enough that he's the real-life Milton Wadhams, but doesn't this make it way sadder? He's less competent at his job. Back when Christo was wrongfully arrested, you know that minor little cock-up, Morton decided to write an article, quote, based on the arrest. Translation, it was an attack article on me, or rather, it was the Sydney Morning Herald's attack article, virtually copied word for word. So no wonder he's not good enough to work for the Sydney Morning Herald, but he is good enough to be working for the paper aiming to be the Sydney Morning Herald for people who don't think the Sydney Morning Herald accuses enough people of, racism! The Saturday paper. Until we get euthanasia in this country, we're going to write articles that'll make our aging audience want to kill themselves. Is how much they copied the SMH. They even do that egotistical, blown up in italics.
Yes, this is my quote for the ages.
I mean, how could he not quote himself? Listen to this sentence he's particularly proud of. So original. Friendly Geordie's catalogue of odious comments and tactics is significant. They cross the streams of racism and frequent sexism. Many are the women who have received his scorn. Journalists, don't you ever get bored of your job? I mean, you seem to love to think you're these high-minded, open-minded, free-thinking intellectuals. You have as many mental reflexes as this crab. Look, you poke it with a stick, and all it can do is go, this stick is phallic. This is because I'm a woman. That's all they have. Hey guys, you're bad at your job. Sexism! Here's Rick's irrefutable evidence of my seething hatred of... What do you call them again? The men with tits. Warhammer fans? That's right, women. Nicole Flint. Yeah. Remember that liberal, literal old bag, using the exact quote we've debunked, what, half a dozen times at this point? Here's a couple of videos for why I hope she, quote, felt my scorn. It really should explain exactly why it's particularly egregious that Rick used Nicole Flint as his only example of, words of violence, you know. When it was this exact cow essentially cheerleading the cops bashing Christo's mum. Yet you're the defender of women's virtue true, are you, Rick? White Knight Sir Fat-a-Lot, here to save the day by lying on behalf of an evil Liberal Party cretin pushing the shit point no one's ever convinced by any way of, see, he had a go at a woman, therefore he hates all women. You failed the if all quartz are quartz question on the IQ test, didn't you, Rick? In fact, judging from your classic simpleton smile of, you must have done poorly at everything in school unless you went to Matilda's and then you would have excelled at finishing the giant cake. How else could you explain Rick completely cancelling out his one appallingly dishonest example with another appallingly dishonest example in the same article? At the very least, he also failed chemistry. This is the written version of acids meeting bases. Listen. Cozy with the former state Labour leader Jodie McKay and her team. You dense twerp. He hates women. Now to admit in the same article that he wanted a woman to be premier. Can you hit yourself on the head like an old TV, Rick? I think it might actually help you get rid of some of the static in your brain. Cozy? I've talked to Jodie McKay once in my life. You couldn't help but bring up Jodie McKay, could you, you fat c***? This is Rick's telltale heart moment. This is more proof that you need that if you looked inside the skull of a journalist, all you'd see is a projector where the brain should be, as that is the closest thing that a journalist can do to mimicking human intelligence. Project. Anything the press wrongfully accuse you of, it's always a guarantee that... You've done exactly that, but worse, huh? Remember the whole, there's a group of mean girls in Labour? Guess who invented that? Mean girls in the press. Talk to anyone who works in Parliament. They'll tell you that there's always a group of cunty private schoolgirls in every press pack that employ the exact same tactics they did in high school of, don't talk to Jacinda, she's a slut. They've just replaced the word slut with sexist. That's all. That's their genius code for exactly what it meant back then, which is, she's not allowed to sit at our table. Yeah, but no one would have wanted to sit at your table anyway. You clearly weren't the popular chicks at school. You were in the same clique as Rick. Hi.
You got the done!
And he is. He's friends with these hags. He admitted it to me on the phone.
For a start, let me address the Luke Foley stuff. I know people involved in the Luke Foley stuff.
These are the same ones that we heard from multiple sources, none of which were from Jodie's team, by the way, Rick, you shameless liar. You would know for sure Jodie's staff would have been terrified of talking to me after you evil little harridans started accosting any woman in Labour who dared talk to me, screeching at them. How dare you go on a show with that sexist? These are not 17-year-olds. They're over 40. They're so old that not only should they be having kids, they can no longer have kids, and they're still this childish. Sending off very public warning shots on both 7 and 2GB. Here they are, links in the description, the press openly saying in that boring hypnotic tone designed to slip these messages into your brain. Sydney's cheapest fuel is currently found at the self-service station Drill and Go in Sydney, Sutherland Shire. Jodie McKay is not to go on alternative outlets that won't treat her like dog shit. That dog shit is ours to mould like putty into whatever character we see fit. Sydney's Easter show has teacup pigs in teacups this year. They then iced her, refused to give her any coverage at all, the Liberals gloating about their tactics, as if the press's psychopathy was an indictment on Jodie. Listen.
And who was the only person who was asked for a sit-down interview with the Leader of the Opposition? A comedian, Mr. Speaker, and that just shows that no one is taking you seriously.
This sentence right here is the same thing that murderers do when their guilt boils over into conversations that have nothing to do with their deeds.
Yeah, so we bought this house. I think it was a pretty good deal.
Don't you think it's okay to kill kids? Like, some of them would grow up to be murderers, right?
What?
Nothing. Yeah, it is a nice house, big backyard, a lot of places to bury a small body.
I'm gonna go.
No, please don't. I can't handle rejection from straight men. Pretending Jodie and I were in this secret Ocean's 11 cabal together to take down Parliament, while his friends planned for a year to take down a good Labour leader of integrity. She went to ICAC with information of corruption in her own party and suffered greatly for it. But too bad, the people that pretend to be looking out for the state's interest prioritise that way less than she didn't have lunch with them once. But that wasn't enough. Rick still has to dig the corpse up and spit on it. Bits had it coming. And yet he has the nerve to write that many are the women who have received my scorn. Now, back to digging up this article from 2 years ago so I could spit on it. He pretends this Justin Bieber-looking motherfucker is a victim using talking points directly lifted from Liberal Party HQ, and yet he writes for a paper whose slogan used to be, get this, not the Daily Telegraph. Oh, well, I hate to break up the pot-bellied chuckles across the eastern suburbs, but how could you be the Daily Telegraph when you come out once a week, you fucking idiots? Putting that to the side though, yes you are. You are exactly the Daily Telegraph, as guess who this waste of Shiraz used to work for before Soy Boy Weekly? The Soy Boy Police. Not a binge either, although I'm sure he spends his entire worthless life on it. Consuming fantasy is the best way to write fantasy. He worked at The Australian, the central node of the Murdoch press, for about as long as you spent in high school, so just think about that for a second. That entire circle of all the way to, yeah, let's give some Year 7 some swirlies! This plump overfed turkey was dutifully pecking at the buttons of the command centre of the Death Star the entire time. This staff member here, although I'm sure his life is nowhere near as depressing as Rick's, judging from all the photos Rick takes of himself by himself. But when asked about that massive expanse of time where Murdoch was his sugar daddy for as long as Freud claims it takes you to set from boy to man, yet now he's the senior reporter at not the Daily Telegraph. Okay, that needs some clarification. I called him after his little hit piece went live, tried to get some answers. Too bad I got none. You are a tool for propaganda that worked for the Murdoch press for 7 years, and then all of a sudden you were like, I'm not feeling comfortable here. Hey, were you pushed out? Is that what happened there? If I ever have a heart attack, don't give me the defibrillator. Just play that over and over again. What a bitch. What a fitting end to a phone call where he calls me a coward.
You said all these things. It's fine. Stand by it. Don't be a coward.
Particularly pathetic when, time to drag out the old projector, this is a massive point in his article. Is friendly Geordies paid by Labour? Please, can the press come up with another attack line? I'm bored of this one. I feel like I'm playing Connect 4 with a lobotomy patient. Look, I'll show you the moves, press, just to show you how this goes every time. with an actual Connect 4 piece. How good is that? We've got a prop here. I know this first move is impossible for you to get your heads around because you're essentially vending machines. You just pop money in your heads and there you go. One political belief. Ooh, it's king-sized. Apparently I'm a monarchist now. Yay! I'm not paid by Labor, I'm paid by patrons. Sign up today. I know journalists really hope repeatedly asking, am I paid by Labor, is like wishing upon a star, and if they just say it enough, one day it might come true, but you really have to stop watching streaming services so much. This is real life, not f***ing Pinocchio. Maybe if you understand that, you'll stop telling so many lies, Rick, that maybe my nose will grow long enough that I get a free dildo out of it and... Ooh, that gives a whole new meaning to Splinter Cell, honey. I know why you desperately want it to be true, and that's because you think in your f***ed head, well, if I hoard myself out to the most evil companies on Earth, surely everyone made the same life decisions as me, right? Right? Please tell me I'm right. It helps me cope. No, most people aren't as scummy as journalists, Rick. You really need to learn that. Most people have political beliefs because they possess a conscience. I'm not even sure if you guys possess consciousness. Look, we're already up to the third one. You guys never see this one coming, but you ready for this? Watch. You're funded by the big four banks and fossil fuel companies. Yeah, I've seen ads for both in the Saturday paper, and yet you dare have the gall to ask me if I'm paid to change my editorial stance. That's Connect 4. Can you make those very simple connections in your very spherical head? Apparently not. As even when it was fervently denied yet again by both me and the Labor Party, Rick, being the snivelling rat he is, still tries to make it sound like I am anyway by writing. Apart from some funding via the unions a few years ago. Funding, by a few years ago he means 7, where I did a single video with the ACTU for far less than I've paid in union fees over my life about getting the youth to shock horror, enroll to vote. Oh, sinister. The organisation that gave us Medicare that I've supported my entire life, reminding us to do what we're legally required to do. Ooh, mad own from the bank hooker here. How do you feel about working for the Murdoch Press for 7 years again, Rick? Music to my ears, you fat c***. Clearly, he didn't want to talk to me about it. Very odd for someone who's always going on about the power of being vulnerable. Ha! What a wimp! He does expose himself on a podcast aimed squarely at other journalists guilty of the exact same sin that I can't remember the name of. It should be called Rationalizations That Silence Your Final Shred of Humanity. Here's his. It's like everything else he says, a lie with the only admirable part of a lie stripped away, as it's not creative at all. People will tell you going back a decade that the Australian used to be a very great paper. Read Paper Emperors if you want to dispel the whole, oh, newspapers, they're the Metallica of journalism, they used to be good. No, they didn't. Newspapers are Hanson. They were never good. It's just something sellouts like Rick say to console themselves that it's okay that I took Murdoch money. The period of time that I was on the take is coincidentally always the period of time the paper, quote, used to be good. Thought me. Sure, whatever helps you sleep at night, Vilma. And in many ways it still is, but some of the craziness has been dialed up. Oh, Rick. Rick, tricky Rick, haven't you found yourself in quite the pickle, Rick? I know you're saying it for the same reason you say everything. You're saying it to get social acceptance amongst your social circle of social rejects, but let's just entertain your fantasy for a second. Maybe it'll be like Shutter Island and we can play out your delusions. You sitting on your self-cushioning ass all throughout the Murdoch Press's shocking coverage of Rudd to Gillard to Rudd to Shorten after 7 years of that evil merry-go-round, all of a sudden, there's a real mood that something's gone wrong. Now, there's a mood that something's gone wrong now. Not at any other point in the Murdoch Empire's history. No, oddly around the time there was wave after wave of staff cuts. That's when you decided to get virtuous, did you, Rick? Fuck off. Principle, yes, that's why I left. This is from a man who accuses me multiple times of having a messiah complex. A messiah complex, okay. What degrees in psychology do you have again, Rick? None. And how many books have you written on yourself, Rick? 3. Right. How many people on Earth give the faintest of fucks you exist? 3. Be honest. Yeah, no one cares. This is what it's all about, isn't it? And I still don't feel sorry for you. In fact, I'm glad you're in pain. But if you want to go down the whole I'm psychoanalyzing people without any qualifications route, I am more than happy to oblige. As for someone who has written 3 books about themselves, you are remarkably unself-aware. The first question that I really have to ask is, where the fuck do you get off writing 3 books about yourself? Who the fuck do you think you are? Paul Keating hasn't written 1 book about himself, but you've earned 3? You think you're that impervious to criticism, do you? You think that you can throw around pop psychology bullshit terms? You couldn't be a more open and shut case of narcissistic victim complex if you tried. I'd say you wrote the book on it, but you wrote fucking 3. How dare you write a Lord of the Rings trilogy about a way shitter fantasy where instead of many goblins, there's only one, and the ring is my anus, and my journey of self-discovery is up my own arse, where it takes me 3 books to explain why sometimes I wish I could be invisible like Frodo. Look at these titles. Just when I thought the genre of fantasy couldn't be any more off with the fairies. My year of living vulnerably. At least my friends think it's good. That's his own company he's using. That is like you putting on your band posters. These guys are hip. My mum. What a loser. That is like when your friend asks you...
Hey, Jordan, can you read my screenplay?
Yeah, sure.
What do you think?
God, this sucks. Yeah, it's great. It's really a heartbreaking book, but a beguiling and necessary one. He's admitting that the only reason anyone would ever say it's good is out of sheer social obligation. Why the would anyone read that shit? Especially when in the interviews, that's like the trailer to a movie. That's where you put your best bits. He admits that his trauma is that his parents had a divorce. Don't you feel like crying? No, because your parents probably got a divorce. Okay, well, try this one on for size. The reason they got a divorce is his father was having an affair. Oh my God. Pass for life awarded to Rick Morton. No wonder he pleads, it's very important not to turn trauma into some sort of contest. Because if you do, then all of a sudden Rick Morton's the kid that doesn't get picked for a side for footy at lunch, which I'm sure triggers more of his traumas. Because he doesn't get to squeal like a piglet about his non-problems, because about 95% of society gets to say shut the fuck up to that. He did an interview where the headline is, gay, working class, vulnerable. My very existence is political. Working class. This spoiled little shit grew up on his family's cattle station. I'm straight out of the block, it's just that my block was 100,000 hectares. He had a fucking governess. You know what uni he went to? A private one. His claim to first prize in the Oppression Olympics is in the interim between being a troubled heir to an area the size of Belgium and a Murdoch darling, is that he lived with his divorced mum in Housing Commission for a stint. I guess his social circle are a bunch of ABC haves that are so removed from the actual poor people they parasitically live off that Rick is the closest thing they've ever seen to a poor person, as this utterly pathetic sob story makes their monocles clunk in their champagne glasses. My divorced mum had to get a job.
And when that all ended and Dad froze the bank accounts and we literally had nothing, and not just nothing, but no network, no support, it was just real emptiness. And she was left for the first time trying to find a job.
Oh, champagne clunked. Who has ever heard of a single parent needing to work? Hopefully I can put this monocle back in my eye. Surely that's the most shocking part. She had to budget for things like putting money in the parking meter for the car.
Can we afford parking if we've got the car?
Okay, poll time. Like the video if you agree Rick sucks, right? Can you like the video if you grew up in a single income household and your parents at many points in your life said, nah, not going to the city, parking's too expensive, mate. Bookworthy. He also thinks he deserves pity because...
You know, I'd left my country hometown. I'd started a really low-paid job as a cadet journalist in a city that I didn't understand, and I got a credit card as soon as I turned 18. And I went out and bought a digital SLR camera for the entire value of the credit card, which was about $2,500, and I just couldn't afford to pay it back.
He thinks he's a victim because he maxed out his credit card.
priceless.
There's a lot in these interviews that explain exactly why Rick is the way he is, but not in the way he intended. The fact that he's at pains to pretend that, I'm a working class man, in the same way the construction worker for the village paper was at theatre, honey. Working class. The closest thing Rick's ever done to lifting a brick is lifting one of his own man boobs to check for lumps. There's a reason the only people who tolerate his pudgy presence are a bunch of Askham slags, and this is because as you stupidly let slip, Rick, you're not working class, you're part of the bunyip aristocracy, and if there's one thing the upper class across the globe can instantly bond on, it's getting f***ed out of their minds on Zanny saying, well, I'm totally oppressed and it's daddy's fault. Now on audiobooks. But yeah, back to the article. I might have a messiah complex, who knows. Whew. Glad we had our psychological skeletons, Rick. I feel a lot better. I'm really glad that I got that insight into you, mate. I now know how you can so shamelessly lie to the public as you find it that easy to lie to yourself. Having said that, the following lie is even astonishing for your standards. I seriously thought that surely this one would be off the Richter scale, but nah, Rick rolled. Police received their first complaint about Friendly Geordies last year when News Corp columnist Joe Hildebrand accused him of stalking and harassment. It went nowhere. What he means by it went nowhere is he knows it was bullshit. He's just trying to make it sound more likely that I'm this Batman villain that somehow outwitted the cops, rather than the far more likely explanation, which is that Joe Hildebrand somehow, temporarily of course, was acting like a narcissistic cokehead with paranoid delusions. But surely not, right? I mean, look at the guy. Can you believe I was kicked off Studio 10? What about me says not relatable to 70-year-old women, huh? Huh? Pizza delivery. Oh no, it's Friendly Geordies! He's here to finish the job! Gee, Rick sure does love to raise suspicions about union motives while raising precisely none about Murdoch monkeys for not the Daily Telegraph. Publishing a lie this vicious isn't out of the ordinary for Derp Smile here. It's not even remarkable that Rick surely must have known it was a lie when he published it. What is remarkable is that the journalist he stole it from knew it was a lie when he published it. This SMH hit piece right here, and actually, now that I think about it, journalist isn't an accurate description of Fergus Hunter anymore. Weapons lobbyist. Yes. Boom. How's that for explosive? Swear to God, unlike Rick Morton, I am not lying to you. Fergus Hunter, who I always wondered why he had such terrible skin, now I know. As you can see, the new range of Saab chemical weapons comes with a safety switch that... Oh God, it doesn't work! I look like the guy from Mask! That horrific bee-sting victim is the former SMH crime reporter who should be reporting on himself as he now works for ASPI. ASPI is a lobby group funded by the US military-industrial complex who pump our airwaves with Chinese alarmism to con us into buying their donors outdated shit military hardware so they can clear out their warehouses of their old stock at massively inflated prices. Never forget, that's the caliber of scum that work for the Sydney Morning Herald. After they sharpen their teeth at the SMH, where they continually campaign for shit public schools and shit public hospitals, they then reach that truly pro-propagandist level like Fergus and move on to the next career challenge, continually campaigning to bomb other countries' public schools and public hospitals. And that is Rick Morton's go-to guy. This, by a mile, is his primary source in his hit job, which, might I say, excellent choice. A glorified weapons dealer is Rick Morton's unquestioned source of truth bombs. Sorry, I'll stop now. I'm just really glad Rick's such a lazy smear of shit on the toilet bowl of Australian journalism that he couldn't be f***ed to think of his own lies, because if I had to go through every claim Rick Morton made, this video would last longer than the Cold Wars his primary source helps orchestrate. But thankfully, we've already refuted most of them because he relies so heavily on Dr. Strangelove here. It took us an hour because who'd have guessed someone who sells death and destruction for a living is a dishonest c***. It should prove to be very interesting viewing to the core readership of the Saturday paper, which is black skivvy wearing Fitzroy f***wits. As you can imagine their politics, you can imagine they'd be thrilled that not only is the senior reporter of Not the Daily Telegraph a fully indoctrinated Murdoch hack that uses the same shady tactics he learned at the Murdoch press in Not the Daily Telegraph, to the degree that he treats a lobbyist who comes from the industry that spread the Iraq has weapons of mass destruction lie as the reincarnation of George Washington. Can't possibly tell a lie. No. None of Fergus Hunter's vilifications needed any verification, according to Rick. In fact, out of the megaton of utter crap he dumped on my character, the only thing Rick felt needed verification was, are you sure you're not paid by the Labor Party? Yes! Stop asking! Even after learning of that level of snakery, I can guarantee you the Saturday paper's readers will be shocked to discover the level of dishonesty their parent company Schwartz Media is more than happy to stoop to publish the following. Fergus Hunter, a child-killing enthusiast, and that was when he worked at the SMH. No, but look at the SMH. They quote Aspie more than they
Quote themselves.
He emailed the police to ask if there's any truth to Jojo's bizarre delusions of grandeur, that I would waste my time stalking that $2 shop afro-haired nobody, and guess what? The cops hadn't even received a call from Joe Hildebrand, let alone were investigating his insane claims. We have the correspondence. Unless the police lied to Fergus, here's what they said. Morning. This wasn't an official FPIU job. Matt McQueen knows Hildebrand and he asked him for advice. Matt offered to investigate it, but Hildebrand didn't want any formal action, so Matt put a COPS event on. Regards, blah. Ooh, Detective Sergeant Matthew McQueen, eh? Wasn't enough for Rick the White Knight himself to side with the parliamentarian cheering on Christo's mum getting bashed. But it turns out that he's also siding with the cop that did it as well. This is how atrociously dishonest the Sydney Morning Herald is. Even when they know it's a lie, their crime reporter will go ahead and publish the lie anyway as their front page story. And then the Saturday paper made that their front page story, which is especially sad as they only have to come up with one of those a week. When I asked Rick about his despicable discernment of sources, this senior reporter claimed,
Jordan, I know what you're trying to do, but it really doesn't bother me. I tried to do a fair and balanced article based on the arrest.
See? Rick is all the proof you need that North Korea is a better society than Australia. Not everyone deserves to be fed. A fair piece, according to Rick Morton, is an article that's 9 paragraphs on the arrest? 20 that are just smears on me which have nothing to do with the arrest? The third of the article that actually is about the arrest, published in a paper that markets itself as anti-coalition, attempts to paint John Barilaro as credible. John is just as believable as Christo, who filmed the thing. Everyone saw the footage, and yet there's two sides to that story. Don't know which one to believe, eh? All of a sudden, there's two sides to the story when it's not defaming me. When it is, it's Hunter's open season! But rest assured, guys, this is a story of national significance. Here's a link to all the information Rick doesn't think is of national significance, including the month-on-month developments that got more and more sinister about how Bruz used our taxpayer money to set up a task force to stalk his personal enemies for 6 months straight. That's not nationally significant. Or how it turns out, John was actually lying about the arrest. Wow, how out of character. Who'd have guessed except everyone except Rick? To this day, his publication is pretending there's still two sides to the story, as that's all this paper has ever published on it. There's not been a single update or correction on this, quote, nationally significant story. They didn't follow it up once, meaning the only thing Rick does think is nationally significant is to use that shameful abuse of state power to paint the picture that it couldn't have happened to anyone more deserving because my friend think Friendly Geordie did a sexist. That's supposedly a fair piece based on the arrest. Why?
I'm writing for an audience that doesn't know who you are. So I'm putting all of the context in there.
All the context. Take note, Schwartz Media subscribers. Publishing the lies of a professional warmongerer and deliberately ignoring the hour-long refutation to that warmongerer, links in the description, because according to Rick Morton and Schwartz Media, not including a single word of that refutation is, quote, all the context. Publishing the lies of a former Liberal MP and fellow Murdoch hack while deliberately ignoring the multiple refutations on it, links in the description, because according to fellow Murdoch hack and the paper that pretends to be anti-Murdoch, not a single word of those refutations are all the context. Casting aspersions about my relationship with the Labor Party, despite God, I don't even know how many public refutations I've done over the years about that utter lack of a relationship. That's all the context. Deliberately publishing the lies of the AUWU. This is a group of private school losers which, gee, rejects of the upper class. I wonder why Rick feels an affinity with them. Not good enough to get hired in the corporate world.
They decided to set up their own corporation to do what the rest of corporate Australia does anyway, attack the unions, only this time from a failure's perspective, with Twitter and Saturday paper.
And are so dishonest they have the gall to call themselves a union while doing it. Links in the description, because both Rick and Schwartzy yet again think that not including a single word of the refutation is giving their readers, quote, all the context. What they think is giving all the context is Googling why Friendly Geordie sucks and chucking all that clear shit into one big gumbo of shit, not adding a pinch of truth to disguise the taste, and that gumbo de crap, according to Rick Morton and Schwartz Media, is the whole story. To which when I asked Rick about that, he said,
Here's the truth, Jordan. I don't think you're a good force in politics.
clearly not. But to summarise, you know who is? A hybrid Liberal Murdoch hack, Matthew McQueen's best friend, these lying cunts, and fucking war dogs here. This should be a wake-up call to anyone that consumes any of Schwartz Media's publications. That's the monthly Saturday paper, 7am podcast, their shit quarterly essays that are just, we jizzed on a monthly article that was nothing but wank to begin with, just so we could justify charging $12 for this spring's bukkake of self-importance. You need to know you've fallen for the exact same scam Crikey pulls on their owners. They must have attended the same marketing seminar. Cash in on counterculture. It's the same con. Pretend you're this vital counterweight to the mainstream press when your entire staff are former employees of the mainstream press, begging for the opportunity to go back into the mainstream press. Like this boring cock that used to work for Schwartz, Osman Faruqi, Greens voter, as they all are, always talking about how to break the system, yet as soon as he was offered a job at the SMH.
Farewell, my friends. I go on to a better place. Gotcha.
And while the rest of them sit around waiting to be picked by... They regurgitate exactly what the mainstream press says, and you know why? Because this article has nothing to do with the arrest. It certainly has nothing to do with my producer that got arrested. It's got nothing to do with me. All Rick Morton's doing is trying to prove what a good little pet he could be to Costello by taking Costello's front page hit piece and... Oh, it's jammed again. What a week! Self-proclaimed quality paper. That's why it's even formatted to look like a f***ing SMH article, because this is Rick's audition for the big leagues. He treats the current paper he works for as a mock template to say, hey SMH, am I good enough to be picked by the claw yet? Please pick me. A straight male like Costello abandoning me triggers my daddy issues. Rick, if you're truly looking for self-discovery, please, let the Messiah guide you. Obama's campaign manager put a surprising amount of weight on the question, what animal does each candidate remind the public of? He says that childlike anthropomorphism gave the pollsters a brilliant snapshot on how the public perceive each candidate on an emotional level. Voters saw John Edwards as a Labrador and Hillary Clinton as a panther, and Obama was seen as a giraffe. Now, look at how they voted. People like dogs, but they don't want to be led by one. As Hillary Clinton proved repeatedly, no one wants to be led by a vicious predator except this pack of hyenas. But for Obama to remind people of a giraffe, an animal that seems to have a graceful wisdom to it, whose mighty neck stretches above the fray, makes a lot of sense how people voted in the primaries now, right? Now listen to what animal reminds Rick of himself. While Rick was publicly justifying why he's a gross slob by romanticising the squalor he lives in, I find myself taking a sort of pride in a return to the clutter and mayhem. It's like looking at one of evolution's counterintuitive creations. The naked mole rat, for example, and marvelling that something so apparently carelessly formed should produce anything of value at all. Ooh. Could you imagine the habits he's not proud of if he sees this as a symbol of pride? He'd be one of those people that if he was your flatmate, you'd go to the fridge and, the cold disinfects the shame. He thinks of mole rats like they're the fucking never-ending story dragon. He sees them as a creature of wonder. Listen to this reverence. Just learned the naked mole rat can move backwards as fast as it can forwards. A little fact for you all. Naked mole rats are amazing. They can survive without oxygen for 18 minutes. Astounding. Admiring and identifying with this shit. Come on. Obama's campaign manager has a point and maybe I don't. Maybe Rick Morton is self-aware after all. He knows that if he was in his dark materials, that would be his spirit animal, and he's proud of it, which let's break that down because it's f***ed. Rat. Devious and sneaky animal. Mole. Another word for c***. Shoe fits. Shoe fits well. Maybe he knows deep down in his dark, nubby burrow of his soul that Freud was right. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and sometimes people just suck because they suck. Maybe the reason he didn't get along with Daddy is how could anyone get along with the mole rat?